Twain once said, "The finest clothing made is a person's skin," but, of course, society demands something more. Fashion is at the heart of our culture, and with every beat it fuels a person's self-esteem and creativity. This can be seen within every generation, especially young children. Young children often use clothing to express their individuality. However, the true expression of one's character can arise from more than just a piece of fabric. In his 1996 State of the Union address, President Clinton proposed the idea of school uniforms by claiming that our young people will learn to evaluate themselves by what they are on the inside instead of what they're wearing on the outside. Then our public schools should be able to require their students to wear uniforms. Uniforms help provide a sense of community and equality among children, and thus should be required within public elementary schools. Today, I will address 3 common oppositions to mandatory uniforms in public schools: restriction on an individual's right to express creativity, the impact of bullying, and the expense. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge that I fully support a child's need to express their creativity. It is an essential element of their development. We all have a right to freedom of expression, and I understand how school uniforms may appear to be an infringement upon this statement. I myself have attended public schools in which uniforms were enforced and where uniforms were not required. I remember the feeling of restriction when I was initially required to wear a uniform. However, there are other ways in which a child can fully express their individuality besides articles of clothing. Areas such as critical thinking, music, and art are successful methods of unlocking a child's drive for creativity. Unfortunately, the support of these programs are under pressure as school districts struggle with budget cuts. Like many of you, I believe that our public schools need to look for ways to save these programs because areas such as the arts are successful alternatives for a child to express their personal style. Uniforms also provide the impression of high academic expectations. Virginia Draw of Youngstown State University conducted a study of public school students in Ohio. She examined the attendance rates and graduation rates from 1994 to 2002 in Ohio's 8 largest public school districts. The districts that required uniforms experienced an 11% increase in graduation rates, while schools that never developed a uniform policy had graduation rates that dropped by 4.6%. The attendance rate at schools with uniforms also increased by an average of 3.5%. The idea of a uniform establishes a high standard for students. This concept of high academic standards through uniforms initially arose in 1994 when Long Beach, California became the first public school district to require uniforms, citing the need to reduce violence, as school grounds often became the center of gang activity. According to a PBS article, 1 year after implementing the uniform policy, school muggings and fights decreased by 50% and sexual offenses decreased by 74%. The number of public elementary schools with uniforms continue to grow today. In a 2007 article by USA Today, David Bernsma, sociologist and author of Uniforms in Public Schools, A Decade of Research and Debate, claimed that 1 in 4 public elementary schools in the U.S. have policies dictating what a student wears to school. Uniforms help create a sense of community. It provides a sense of belonging for students. This is especially important for victims of bullying and children of lower socioeconomic status. Perhaps one of the greatest fears within a child is the ability to not fit in. We all remember growing up our attempts to seem cool or in par with the status quo. One of the major contributing factors to the idea of fitting in coincides with styles and labels of clothing. I'm not going to state that uniforms will cure bullying, as I do recognize that despite the presence or absence of a uniform, children will continue to bully and be bullied. However, school uniforms allow clothing to be one less platform to tease and taunt one another. Those who are in a lower socioeconomic status must face a harsh reality that they may not be able to be accepted by their peers. Imagine being a child who desperately wants to be included at a lunch table, yet solemnly sits alone, knowing they will never be able to fit in because they cannot afford the outfits that other children are wearing. A uniform provides the opportunity that every child, despite their socioeconomic background, is respected and appreciated by their peers. But what about the additional costs? A consumer expenditure survey from the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates the average American household spends $641 per person a year on shoes and clothing. How does this compare to the cost of uniforms? According to a local uniform store in Tempe, Arizona, The average price for a year's worth of uniforms is $225. This includes 5 polo shirts at a cost of $19 a shirt and a week's worth of bottoms for up to $23 per item. However, there are alternatives to further reduce uniform expenses. In a school in which uniforms are not required, children are more sensitive to wearing an article of clothing more than once a week. With uniforms, children have the ability to re-wear their clothes without the embarrassment of being noticed. Uniforms eliminate the need to purchase mass amounts of regular clothing, as the majority of a child's day is spent in a uniform. In addition, an increase in the amount of uniforms creates a higher demand for uniform stores and more competitive prices. A few large corporations, such as Target, also sell uniforms that typically carry a lower cost than private companies. Perhaps the most welcome benefit is the ability to recycle clothing through donation. Schools can accept used uniforms, who then sell back to families at little or no cost. These sales can also bring in a slight revenue for schools. In conclusion, I strongly believe creativity is an essential component of a child's development, yet this does not have to be defined through fabric. Although uniforms do not fully eliminate bullying or behavioral issues, there are benefits. Despite the initial expense, uniforms can be financially reasonable. School uniforms provide the best environment for a child to thrive academically, socially, and convey the article of clothing that, according to Mark Twain, truly matters.